So you know about the Fab Four. I just added an extra 100 people. And I'm going to tell you about the book. Why I decided to call it Fab 104 was an accident. It was not by design. I did a talk at the fest last year, and saying this is how the book was progressing. And at that point it was the Fab 76. It started as the Fab 27 in Liverpool, and just gradually, as I found more and more people, the number kept going up and up and up. And once it got to 104, I thought, oh, that's perfect. Absolutely perfect. So Fab 104. And they're the 104 people who play a part in the evolution of the Beatles. And the book really covers the period of 1956, when the Quarrymen were formed, through to 1962, when of course the last piece of the jigsaw to be added to the Fab Four was Ringo in the August of '62. The whole idea behind the book was the musical evolution of the Beatles. We all know what happened when they became John, Paul, George and Ringo. The Fab Four, they took over the world. Hence the reason we're here today, 50 years after they first came to America. So there's a lot of history. What hadn't been done before was tracing, almost like doing a rock family tree, tracing all the musicians who play a part in the story, from the very first lineup of the Quarrymen all the way through to when Ringo joined. But I wanted to do more than just the musicians in the group. So what I decided to look at was not just the musicians, but who taught them how to play. And this sort of starts with my story of the Beatles, which goes back to when I was about 10 years old. And I first picked a guitar up. And the first songs I learned to play were Beatles songs. I got a songbook called The Beatles Complete. And they're the first songs I learned to play on guitar. And so my Beatles story starts with the music. And I was thinking, I've not done anything famous yet. I've had a couple of bands with friends, that's all we did. But I remember my parents, who spent a lot of money buying me guitars, keyboards, amplifiers, the lot. But also the people who taught me how to play, particularly my two good friends, Gary and Derek, who are still my friends today. And I was thinking then, well, okay, John got the Quarrymen started, but how did John get started? And the most important person in John's musical life to get going was his mum Julia. Julia was a musician. She was a banjo player, ukulele player, and played piano as well. Could sing, was very funny, very gregarious, very outgoing, really encouraged John. So she's an important part of the story. So I started then building the layers up and thinking, well, for each of the Beatles, who got them going? Who inspired them? Who got them going? Who got them started? And I thought, okay. But John didn't just play guitar. He played harmonica. He got his harmonica from his Uncle George. So we know of Aunt Mimi, very important person in John's life. He lived with Mimi and George from the age of 5. It was George who gave John his first harmonica. He couldn't play it. But Julia had a neighbour called Arthur Pendleton. He lived 2 doors away from Julia's house. And so John would go to Arthur Pendleton and get harmonica lessons. So Uncle George is important in the story. Arthur Pendleton is important in the story. So that's how the book starts building up. Thinking, all these people, it may just be a very, very small part, but it's important in the evolution of the group. And so how I'm looking at it is, this is the musical evolution of the Beatles. So from the cover, we've got our first Fab Four. And if we ever get that working, you'll see the pictures.
One day.
I've got my technical assistant working superbly then. The first Fab Four was John Lennon, Pete Shotton, Eric Griffiths, and Bill Smith. They were the founding members of the Quarrymen at Quarrymen School, summer of 1956. But one of the amazing stories that I found was that what got John started with a skiffle group. And there's a guy in history whose story's never been told, and his name was Jeff Lee. Jeff was a school friend of John's. John was always singing around school. And Jeff said to John, why don't you start a skiffle group? And so Jeff becomes really important because he's the one who got John started with his first group. But as well as the suggestion, Jeff had a guitar which he couldn't play. So he gave it to John. So the very first guitar that John learned to play on was not, as we first thought, the one that was bought for him by his mum, but the one that was given to him by his school friend. And when I started doing the research, I found a quote from John, which says, first guitar I learned to play on, I borrowed from a friend at school. So for the first time ever, Jeff Lee's story is being told. The very, very start of the Beatles has changed. And so these are the nuggets of information that inspire me to go, okay, what's next? What else are we going to find? So that's in 1956. Now the Quarrymen went through a number of different musicians. Now I don't know if you've seen a typical lineup of a skiffle group, but it tends to be a couple of guitars, maybe a banjo, a washboard, and the washboard was just what your mum had in the kitchen, wooden frame, metal slats in the middle. You got the thimbles in your mum's sewing basket, rat-tat up and down on the washboard. That was your rhythm section. This is what skiffle was like. It was exciting music. And they had a tea-chest bass. And a tea-chest bass was just like a wooden packing case. It's what they used to send tea over from Ceylon and all these places. And it's like a wooden case about that big. And you got a wooden pole, tie some string to the top of the pole, onto the box. You pull it really tight, and you go twang, and that makes the sound in the box. That was your early bass guitar. That's how basic the skiffle music was. But nobody really wanted to play the tea-chest bass, because a bit of string, you're pulling this, it's not the most exact instrument in the world. And you can guarantee the blisters on your fingers will be horrible. The sensible lads wore gloves. If they didn't, they're pulling this string and it would rip the skin on your fingers. So they went through a lot of people tea-chest bass. But Bill Smith, who was one of the founding members of the Quarrymen, again, he's one of those guys who's never really been interviewed before, and he'd been living abroad for years, has moved back to Liverpool. So I interviewed him, had a good chat, and he was telling me when they first came up with the idea of getting the group going, he said we were standing outside the woodwork room at school, and we said, okay, we're going to do this. Bill borrowed a packing case from the woodwork room, which he never took back. And they said, okay, what are we going to call ourselves? And Bill said, well, we're at Quarrybank. Our school song, the opening line is Quarrymen, long before our birth. He said, why don't we call ourselves the Quarrymen? There's four of them. Three of them thought it was a good idea. One of them thought, not a good idea. Who do you reckon didn't like the idea? John. Exactly. He's going to do a music group. Why associate it with the school? But the other three convinced him it would be a good idea. So that's what they went with. They said, okay, let's do it. We're going to be the Quarrymen. So they went through a number of different musicians over the years. Now you won't be able to see it on this, but I will just follow so I know my stories. One thing you do miss is a photograph of me in my early teens playing my guitar, so it's probably a good thing that you're not getting to see that. Now I did, with my first book, Liverpool, I did a challenge because there's so many books out there. And so, do you really need another Beatles book? And I set 10 questions and said, if you can answer the questions, fine, you don't need to buy the book. Made it even simpler for this one. I've got 5 questions for you. Okay. Who suggested Johnny starts the skiffle group? It's the guy I've just told you about. Who taught Paul how to play guitar? Very important guy. Again, story not being told. But he's the guy that Paul credits. On the day that he met John for the first time, he says, the songs and the chords that I played to John were taught to me by Ian James. Ian James, such an important part in the story. Paul and Ian used to go back to Ian's house. And it also confirmed one of the things that happened on the day John met Paul was that Paul had learned to play a right-handed guitar, upside down. This is why John was so impressed with Paul that day. Julia had taught John how to play, but not to play guitar properly, because she only played banjo and ukulele. So John used to tune his guitar to his mum's banjo, which has only got 5 strings. So John was playing banjo chords on the guitar. So when he meets Paul for the first time, Paul takes John's guitar, tunes it up, so already he can do more than John can do. But then, with being left-handed, he turns John's guitar upside down, inverts the chords and plays the songs upside down on the guitar. That's why John was so impressed with Paul on the day they met, because he can do way more. And at that point, John probably looked at the musicians in the Quarrymen and thought, who the hell are this lot? This is a proper musician. That's when everything changed. From being just a bit of fun in the skiffle group, when Paul joined, John could see the possibility. This was going to be rock and roll, which is what he wanted to do. Who gave George guitar lessons at school? The guy's name, Colin Manley. Colin went on to be probably the best guitarist in any of the Merseybeat groups, in a group called the Remo Four. An amazing guitarist, again, school friend of George's. And he taught George a lot of the finger picking style. So a lot of the things that George brought into the Beatles tunes, he picked up from his friend Colin from school. So that's where the story's going. Oh, this is my stalker. She follows me everywhere. So this guy Colin Manley, very important. But there are others. George was absorbing influences from anybody he could. You know, the guy, a friend of his, he grew up in Speak with him, called Jeff Nugent. Jeff went on to be guitarist and singer with the Undertakers, again, one of the best music videos. So they pull in all these influences. It's all important parts of the story. Any idea which Beatle played in the group called the Cadillacs? Ever come across that one? I hadn't. It was Ringo. I found a quote from Ringo from 1962 where he cites one of the bands he played in. It's a Liverpool group called the Cadillacs. Again, I haven't come across that from anywhere else. So again, a fascinating bit of the story. And the last of the most exciting things was a guy called Norman Chapman, and he was in the Silver Beatles in 1960. There's never been a published photograph of Norman. I tracked his daughter down, and she shared about a dozen photos. So again, for the first time ever, Norman's story and his photographs are there. So let's get into the book. There's only 400 pages in there, so it'll give you something to do. So let's talk about the evolution then. So we talked about in July '57, and Paul and John have met for the first time. John's really impressed with Paul, and so he invites him to join the group.